Hey there, everybody. Nice to see you again. So Patrick over at Fuji Rumors, which is a great site that keeps us very well informed about what's happening and what's coming, posted an article. I'm going to reference it over here. He says, Fujifilm promises major firmware updates also for X-T5 and X-H2, new AF system of X-H2S, and where the catch is. And it's the catch that I wanted to talk about. So what he's saying is that and it's conjecture on his part. Nobody at Fuji, or he didn't get any information from a rumor or anything. I think it's conjecture on his part. He's saying that the X-T5 and the X-H2 are scheduled for a firmware update eventually, or will get a firmware update eventually, like the X-H2S did. And let me go off on a tangent here. It's turning out that that new X-H2S firmware update for the AF, people are starting to say, like, yeah, this is on par with the best in the industry. That would be Sony. So Fuji is there with the X-H2S in terms of autofocus. It's as good as Sony now for stills. It was as good as Sony, and that goes for the X-H2 and the X-T5, as far as I'm concerned, for video since the introduction. Like, these cameras are great for AF and video. I haven't had a misstep yet. And I mean, they're as good as the Sony. I mean, yeah, so that's it as far as video is concerned. But now the X-H2S, there are reports out there, and I don't do fast action, I don't do fast action stills, I don't do wildlife, I don't do anything that requires heavy AF, okay? And I would include weddings in that, okay? Somebody made a comment recently that, like, they're unhappy with the Fuji AF system for weddings because, when they're trying to get the bride coming down the aisle or the cake shot or something, like, they need 15 frames per second and they need the AF to work because they got to get that one shot. I mean, they're firing off 100 photographs. That's spray and pray, okay? And I would argue that, like, there's a lack of an understanding that photography, I mean, is about the decisive moment. And it's not about taking 500 photographs and praying that the one good one, that there's one good one in there. Like, philosophically, I have a problem with that. I mean, this is very high level debate, and I get that. But philosophically, I have a problem with that. I would still shoot a wedding today, and if I get any weddings, I would do it this way. For the cake shot and stuff like that, I would lock focus and then wait for the decisive moment and hit it. Okay, and I consider that being a photographer. Like, that's the only thing you really have. That's the biggest creative input you have as a photographer, is capturing the decisive moment, knowing when to push the button. And that's a skill that takes a long time to develop too. Okay, I know that's when I was learning to be a wedding photographer and I was apprenticing in New York City with some of the top studios in New York City. Like, that was kind of it, was learning when that decisive moment was. Of course, back then it was film, and there was no, I mean, the fastest camera was 5 frames per second, and we didn't even have a motor drive on our medium format cameras. So, I mean, it was take the shot, crank the thing, take the shot. So you had to learn when the decisive moment was. Now, there are instances, I understand, where it is necessary to spray and pray, and I'm not the authority on that. But a wedding is not one of them. And that's just my opinion as a wedding photographer who has shot literally thousands of weddings. It's how I made my living for many years. Okay, but that's a tangent. So, the X-H2S is now industry on par with the industry's best. And at Fuji Rumors, Patrick says that the X-H, this is what he says, and yet we should not rejoice too early, because even if Fujifilm was to bring the new AF to the Fuji X-T5 and X-H2, both cameras have certain hardware limitations that the X-H2S has not, or does not. The X-H2 limitations are more megapixels require more time to read out, the buffer fills up faster, and no stack sensor slows down the readout and processing. Well, I'm reading through that, and I'm saying to myself, those three things I don't think affect the AF performance. And so I'm not really sure that the X-H2 and the X-T5 are going to be less capable AF performers once they get their new firmware algorithms. Okay, now what these things are affecting, so let's take them one at a time. On the X-H2, more megapixels require more time to read out. This is true, but that has nothing to do with the speed of autofocus. And the only way it affects the speed of autofocus is it's indirectly, it affects the speed of your continuous shots. Okay, so whereas the X-H2S, because it has smaller megapixels, less megapixels, 26 instead of 40, the readout time is faster. You can do more consecutive shots. It's got a faster burst rate. Okay, I get that, but that shouldn't have anything to do. I mean, if you're taking 20 frames per second with an X-H2S and they're all in focus, that's great. But I don't see how doing 10 frames per second because of the more time to read out is going to affect those 10 frames being in focus, right? I mean, if anything, it should help the autofocus to be even more successful. So I don't see how more megapixels and more time to read out is going to affect autofocus in any way. Same thing with the buffer fills up faster. How does that affect autofocus? You're going to get less shots, but there's no reason why they shouldn't all be in focus, right? I mean, that's the goal. Okay, I don't see how the buffer affects autofocus. Third thing, no stacked sensor slows down the readout and processing. Now, that's possible, but I'm not sure, right? I mean, the stacked sensor has to do with the readout speed, and again, that affects the multiple shot bursts rate. Not sure it affects the autofocus performance. It might. Like, I'm not an expert on any of this, but again, I don't think it directly affects autofocus performance. So X-T5 limitations, same thing. Number one, more megapixels require more time to read out. No stacked sensor slows down the readout and processing. Smaller buffer. Okay, that's true, but smaller buffer doesn't affect the autofocus performance. It affects your multiple shot burst rate. And no CF Express Type B slot. What does writing to card have to do with autofocus performance? Autofocus performance, it's in focus or it's not. I mean, you're going to get, so the X-H2 and the X-T5, you're going to get less shots than the X-H2S, because the X-H2S is faster in terms of taking photographs. But in terms of those photographs that you are taking, and on the X-T5 and the X-H2, there's going to be less of them. I don't see how them being in focus or not has anything to do with these points. So I'm not beating up on Patrick. I'm continuing the conversation and giving a counterpoint argument to the things he's saying in this article. And I mean, it's a good article and it's good information, but I'm not sure. I mean, I think it's conjecture on his part. Well, here's the alternative argument, and you know, as to why that might not be accurate. And that's all I'm saying. I mean, I really like Patrick's site, and I like Fuji Rumors. If you haven't been there, you should go there, because it's a good site. So anyway, that's what I have to say. I mean, personally, in my opinion, I expect the new firmware update for the improvement of the autofocus in the X-T5 and the X-H2 to be as good as the upgrade in the X-H2S. And by that, from everything I can tell, it seems that it's Sony level quality. It's as good as the best autofocus out there. And I fully expect that to be true of the X-T5 and the X-H2. I don't expect the X-H2 and the X-T5 to have the same burst rates as the X-H2S. Okay. But I do expect that but I do expect the hit rates to be percentage-wise comparable, if that makes any sense at all. So thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications. Not trying to beat up on Fuji Rumors. I love the site. Love Patrick. Does a great job. A little too much GFX information because, you know, but just kidding, Patrick. If I could afford one, I'd have one, even though I don't need it. Anyway. We'll see you out there. Have a great one.